Some royal marriages were not love stories. They were political traps in silk and gold. And some ended in exile, madness, and execution. Hello there, and welcome to the HistSleep channel. Tonight, we find ourselves drifting through the shadowed hallways of the past, visiting the cold, quiet rooms where "I do" was a sentence, not a choice. We're looking back at a time when a wedding was a calculated move on a chessboard, a moment where the weight of a crown was heavy enough to crush the spirit of those forced to wear it. Before we step into these stories of broken crowns and the tragedies that followed, I would love it if you just take a moment to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. It really helps these stories reach those who need a bit of quiet in their night. And I'm curious, where has this story found you tonight? Are you listening under the warmth of a blanket, or perhaps you're watching the soft glow of a city through a window? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and I truly value your presence here. Now, settle in. Let the world outside fade away. Take a deep breath. Let's talk about those royal unions where power was the priority, and love was never even a guest. Imagine, if you will, a vast, cold cathedral in the heart of Europe. The year is perhaps 1450. Or maybe 1850. The era changes, but the feeling remains the same. The floor is made of polished stone, so cold that it feels like ice beneath the thin slippers of a princess. She is standing at the altar, but she is not looking at her groom. She is looking at the tapestry on the far wall, tracing the intricate threads of a hunt that happened 100 years ago. In the world of boring history, we don't focus on the battles or the shouting. We focus on the stillness of the moment. The weight of the jewelry, the smell of the old incense, the way the sunlight hits a single speck of dust floating in the air. For this princess, this wedding is a treaty. A signature on a piece of parchment that was signed months ago by men in dark rooms. Her marriage is the price of peace between two nations that have hated each other for generations. She is the bridge, but bridges are meant to be walked upon, not to be happy. Think about the silence of the wedding feast. To the outside world, it is a celebration. There is wine, there is meat, there is the sound of distant flutes. But inside the mind of the bride, there is only a long, endless list of rules. How to sit. How to smile without showing too much teeth. How to speak to a husband who is a total stranger, a man who speaks a different language, a man who sees her only as a biological necessity for an heir. In the Victorian era, these power marriages were draped in even more layers of lace and expectation. The tragedy was quieter then, hidden behind heavy velvet curtains and tea services. A queen might spend 40 years sitting across from a king, and they might never share a private thought. They are two statues, placed on a pedestal for the public to admire, while their hearts slowly turn to stone in the shadows. Let your mind drift to the Flemish Renaissance paintings we often see in museums. The subjects are so still. Their skin is pale, their expressions are unreadable. Many of those women were the victims of these power-driven unions. They were painted to show their wealth, their clothes, their status. But if you look closely, if you really look into their painted eyes, you see the exhaustion of a soul that has been sold for a border. The power marriage is a slow tragedy. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the long afternoons of embroidery where the needle goes in and out, for hours. It happens in the corridors of a palace where every footstep echoes, reminding you of how empty the space truly is. As you breathe slowly, Imagine the transition from the ceremony to the daily life of the court. The excitement of the wedding fades quickly. What remains is the routine. The boring part of being royal. Waking up at the same time, being dressed by strangers, attending meetings about grain prices and land disputes, and then the dinner. The dinner table is where the tragedy of a loveless marriage is most visible. The clinking of silver against china. The sound of a clock ticking on the mantelpiece. The king is thinking of his mistresses, or his armies. The queen is thinking of the home she left behind when she was 15. They speak in polite, short sentences. Is the wine to your liking? The gardens look well today. Yes, they do. And then, more silence. This silence is what we are here for tonight. It is a heavy, thick silence that covers the palace like a blanket. It is a silence that makes you feel sleepy, but also a little sad. It is the sound of a life being lived for everyone else, except for oneself. The tragedy of the broken crown is that the crown is too heavy for a human head. It was designed for a god or a ghost. When a human woman wears it in a marriage made for power, it slowly pushes her down. It makes her neck ache. It makes her spirit weary. Think of the long nights in the Victorian palaces, the gaslight flickering low, the coal fire dying in the grate. The queen lies awake, listening to the rhythm of the palace. The guards' changing shift. The wind in the chimney. She is the most powerful woman in the room, and yet, she has no power over her own heart. She belongs to the state. She belongs to the history books. She belongs to the boring passage of time. In the medieval times, these marriages were even more brutal in their simplicity. You were taken from your home, put on a horse, and ridden for weeks to a place where you knew no one. You were married in a language you didn't understand. And you were expected to produce a king before you were 20. There is a peace in knowing that these stories are now just echoes. The tragedies are over. The people are gone. All that is left is the quiet narrative, the slow retelling of their lives. We can look back at them with empathy, and then we can let them go. As you drift further into sleep, let the image of the golden cage fade. Let the heavy velvet curtains close. The marriage made for power is just a chapter in a very long, very old book. The pages are turning slowly. The ink is dry. The story is finished. Rest now, in the quiet spaces between the words. Let the history of the tragedy be the lullaby that carries you away. There is no more politics tonight. There are no more treaties. Just the soft, rhythmic sound of time passing. Sleep while the marble columns stay still. Sleep while the broken crowns are laid to rest. As the echoes of the wedding feast fade into the cold stone of the past, we find ourselves following a different path. A path that leads away from the familiar gardens of home, toward a border that feels more like an edge of a cliff. Tonight, we must look at a figure even more solitary than a queen of power. We must look at the child bride. A princess who is barely more than a girl, standing on the deck of a ship or in the corner of a heavy wooden carriage, watching her childhood disappear behind a curtain of rain. Imagine the journey. In the centuries before trains or cars, a journey to a foreign throne was a slow, agonizing separation. Each mile of dusty road, each creak of the carriage wheel, was a tether being cut. She is 12, perhaps 14. She carries a small trunk of dolls she is told she must no longer play with, and a heart that is far too young to understand the maps being redrawn in her name. Think of the boring details of this travel. The weeks spent in damp inns. The smell of wet horses and old leather. The way the landscape slowly changes from the rolling green hills of her home to the jagged, unfamiliar mountains of a land that views her as an intruder. She does not speak their language yet. To her, the foreign court is a roar of sounds that mean nothing. She looks at the faces of her new attendants, women with sharp eyes and stiff lace collars, and she sees not friends, but observers. Every move she makes is being recorded. Does she walk with grace? Does she eat too much? Does she cry when she thinks no one is looking? In the history of these child brides, there is a specific kind of stillness. It is the stillness of a bird in a cage that has not yet learned it cannot fly. Let's drift into a Victorian memory. Imagine a young girl from a small German principality sent to the vast, cold expanse of Russia or the fog-heavy streets of London. She arrives at the palace at dusk. The gaslights are being lit, casting long, spindly shadows across the marble foyer. She is tiny in that space. The ceiling is so high that it feels like the sky, but a sky made of stone and gold leaf. The foreign throne is not just a seat of power, it is a monster that requires constant feeding. It feeds on her youth. It feeds on her memories of her mother's voice. It feeds on the games she used to play in the orchards. All of that is stripped away at the border, replaced by a title that feels too big for her narrow shoulders. As you breathe in the cool air of your own room, think of the silence she encounters in her new bedchamber. The bed is enormous. It is draped in heavy damask, thick enough to muffle any sound. She lies there, listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of a foreign city. The bells of a cathedral she doesn't recognize. The shouting of guards in a tongue she is struggling to learn. The child bride is a masterpiece of political patience. The kingdoms wait for her to grow. They watch her body as if it were a field of crops, waiting for the right season to harvest an heir. This is the most boring and yet most tragic part of her existence. Years of waiting. Years of being a guest in a house where she will never be at home. Think of the portraits from the Flemish Renaissance again. Sometimes, you see a portrait of a child in adult clothing. A girl of 10 wearing a corset so tight it restricts her breath. A collar of lace so high it keeps her chin tilted up in a permanent expression of pride she doesn't feel. The artist captures the jewels on her fingers, rings that are too large and have been padded with scrap of velvet to stay on. She is a symbol, not a person. The tragedy of the foreign throne is the loss of the self. When she crosses that border, she loses her name. She becomes the Spaniard, the Frenchwoman, the Austrian. She is the representative of a place she can never return to. If her home country goes to war with her new country, she is the enemy in the palace. She is the spy in the breakfast room. Imagine her sitting at a writing desk. The wood is dark oak, polished until it reflects the candle flame like deep water. She is trying to write a letter home. But she knows that the letters are opened. She knows that the censors read her words before her mother ever will. So she writes about the weather. She writes about the quality of the silk. She writes that she is well. But the ink tells a different story. A smudge where a tear fell. A trembling line where her hand shook. As you feel your eyes grow heavy, let the carriage wheels stop turning. The journey is over. She has arrived. The foreign throne has claimed her. She will spend the rest of her life in these rooms, walking these same corridors, looking at these same statues. There is no escape from the silk and gold. There is only the slow acceptance of the ritual. The child bride grows old in a land that never quite trusts her. She becomes a shadow among shadows. We focus on her tonight because her story is so quiet. It doesn't scream from the history books. It whispers from the margins. It is a story of long, lonely afternoons. It is a story of a heart that stayed behind at the border while the body moved forward into the tragedy of the crown. Let the weight of her heavy skirt settle into the floor. Let the cold air of the foreign palace become a warm mist that surrounds you. The child is safe now. History has tucked her away in the archives. The carriage is empty. The dolls are dust. The silence of the foreign throne is a lullaby. It is the sound of a story that has no more chapters to write. It is the stillness of a life that was lived as a long, slow breath. Sleep now, as she finally finds rest. Sleep while the maps of the world change and fade. Sleep in the quiet, in the dim light of the throne that demanded everything and gave back only silence. We move now from the lonely journey of the child bride into the heart of the palace itself. Into the private chambers where the fire is always lit, but the air remains freezing. This is the story of a presence and an absence. The presence of a queen and the absolute absence of a king's heart. Now, let the weight of your blankets ground you. Let your breathing slow down to the rhythm of an ancient, sleeping castle. We are entering a room where two people sit, but only one is truly seen. Imagine a dinner table set for two. The silver is polished to a mirror finish. The crystal glasses catch the amber light of the candles, creating tiny dancing stars on the tablecloth. At one end sits the queen. She is elegant, her posture is perfect, her jewelry is a fortune. At the other end sits the king. He does not look up from his plate. To him, she is part of the furniture. She is as much a part of the room as the heavy oak paneling, or the portrait of his grandfather on the wall. He married her because he had to. He married her because his ministers told him it would secure the succession. But his mind is elsewhere. Perhaps it is with a woman he met in the village, or perhaps it is with his soldiers on the frontier. Anywhere but here. In the boring reality of history, this was the quietest kind of torture. It wasn't always shouting or cruelty. Often, it was just polite indifference. A king who would enter a room, nod to his queen, and then talk to his hunting dogs for an hour. A king who would remember every detail of a battle from 10 years ago, but forget his wife's birthday or the color of her favorite dress. Think of the Victorian paintings of royal couples. Notice the distance between them. Even when they are standing close, their eyes are looking in different directions. They are two parallel lines, destined to travel together for a lifetime, but never to touch. The queen learns to live in the gaps. She fills her time with the small, repetitive tasks that define a royal life. She gardens. She plays the piano, the notes echoing through a drawing room that is too large for one person. She spends hours choosing the exact shade of silk for a new pair of gloves, not because she cares, but because it gives her something to think about besides the empty seat beside her. Imagine her walking through the palace gardens at twilight. The dew is starting to settle on the roses. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and lavender. She walks slowly, her skirts brushing against the stone path with a soft, rhythmic shh, shh sound. She is waiting for something that she knows will never come. A footstep behind her. A hand on her shoulder. A voice calling her name, not as a title, but as a person. But the king is in his study. The door is closed. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn tight. He is surrounded by maps, by ledgers, by the boring business of being a monarch. To him, love is a distraction, a weakness. He views his queen as a vessel for history, a way to ensure that his name continues after he is gone. Once she has provided an heir, she becomes invisible. This is the tragedy of the unloved queen. She is the mother of a future king, but she is a stranger to the current one. As you feel your muscles relax, think of the winter nights in the palace. The wind rattles the window panes. The queen sits by the hearth, watching the logs turn from bright orange to a soft, glowing gray. She listens to the sounds of the palace shutting down for the night. The heavy bolts being slid into place. The footsteps of the night watchman fading down the hall. She is surrounded by luxury, but it is a cold luxury. The diamonds around her neck don't keep her warm. The silk sheets feel like paper against her skin. She lives in a world where everyone bows to her, everyone obeys her, but no one truly knows her. In the Flemish Renaissance style, an artist might paint this queen with a single bird in a cage nearby. A subtle symbol of her existence. The bird has seeds, it has water, it has a golden perch. But it has nowhere to go. It sings to a room that doesn't listen. The king's neglect is like a slow-moving fog. It seeps into every corner of her life. It changes the way she speaks. Her voice becomes softer, more hesitant. It changes the way she dreams. She no longer dreams of romance, she dreams of simple things. A quiet house in the country. A walk in the rain without a dozen servants following her. A life where she is not a symbol, but a soul. But the sun rises, and the ritual begins again. The dressing. The breakfast. The public appearances where they must stand side by side, smiling for the crowds. They are the perfect couple, the icon of the nation. No one sees the coldness between them, because the gold is so bright. The jewelry blinds the world to the tragedy. Let the image of the cold dinner table fade. Let the sound of the ticking clock slow down, and down, and down. The king and his queen are now just names in a dusty genealogy chart. Their silent dinners ended long ago. The fires in their hearths have been cold for centuries. There is a strange peace in that. The loneliness has dissolved into time. The queen is no longer waiting. The king is no longer ignoring her. They are just part of the quiet architecture of the past. Breathe out slowly. Feel the stillness of the room around you. You are safe in the present, away from the cold marble and the unloved thrones. The story is winding down. The ink is fading. The tragedy has found its rest. Sleep now, while the history grows dim. Sleep, while the candles flicker one last time before going out. Sleep, in the deep, soft silence of a heart that no longer has to wait. The echoes of the silent dinner table still linger in the air, like the faint scent of a candle that was blown out hours ago. We move now to a tragedy that happens not over years, but in the very first moments of a union. This is the story of the broken promise. Now, let us look at the moment when forever was promised, only to be forgotten before the sun had even set. Imagine a courtyard, paved with ancient, gray stones. It is the day after a royal wedding. The banners are still hanging from the balconies, their bright colors slightly dampened by a morning mist. To the people in the streets, the celebration is still going on. They are still drinking to the health of the new couple. But inside the palace, the atmosphere has already shifted. The ceremony was a masterpiece of theater. The king had stood before the altar, his hand in hers, his voice steady and resonant. He had promised to protect her, to cherish her, to be her partner until the end of time. The words were beautiful. They were forever. But as soon as the heavy oak doors of the private apartments closed, the mask fell away. Think of the boring silence of that first morning. The queen wakes up in a bed that is large enough for 4 people, but she is alone. The sunlight filters through the dust motes in the air, creating long, golden bars across the floor. She waits for a knock at the door. She waits for the man who promised her forever to come and say good morning. The tragedy of being ignored immediately is a cold, sharp shock. It is the realization that you were not married for who you are, but for what you represent. Now that the treaty is signed, now that the crown is on your head, the king has no further use for you. You are a completed task. A checked box on a list of state duties. In the Victorian era, this isolation was often dressed up in strict protocol. The queen would be told that the king is busy with the affairs of state. He is in a meeting that cannot be interrupted. He is hunting in the northern forests. He is reviewing the troops. There is always a reason, a logical, boring, endless reason why he is not there. Let your mind wander to the details of her room. The wallpaper is silk, embossed with a pattern of lilies and vines. If you look closely, you can trace the pattern with your eyes, up and down, over and over. The dressing table is covered in silver brushes and glass bottles of perfume that she will never use, because there is no one to notice the scent. She sits for her portrait, perhaps in the style of the Flemish masters. The artist tells her to look regal. He doesn't know that she is actually looking at the door, hoping it will open. He paints the lace on her sleeves, each tiny knot and loop captured with obsessive detail. The painting takes months. During those months, she sees the king only 3 times. Each time, he is polite. He is formal. And he is gone within minutes. The promise of forever becomes a ghost that haunts the corridors. Think of the boring afternoons in the solarium. The queen sits with her ladies-in-waiting. They are embroidering a vast tapestry that will eventually hang in a hallway no one visits. The sound of the needles passing through the fabric is the only music. Tuck, pull, tuck, pull. They talk in whispers about things that don't matter. The price of silk. The health of a distant cousin. The way the light is changing on the garden wall. Everything is designed to fill the time. Because time is the only thing she has. As you feel your breath becoming slower, imagine the king's perspective. To him, he has done his duty. He has given the people a queen. He has fulfilled the promise to his father and his ministers. He doesn't see the woman in the room. He sees the succession. He is already thinking of the next war, the next tax, the next building project. The marriage was a bridge he crossed, and once he reached the other side, he never looked back. The ignored queen lives in a state of permanent waiting. Waiting for a dinner that will be silent. Waiting for a visit that will be brief. Waiting for a life that was promised, but never delivered. In the deep stillness of the night, she walks through the palace. The floorboards creak under her weight, a slow, rhythmic groan of old wood. She passes the portraits of queens who came before her. Do they recognize her? Do they see the same loneliness in her eyes that they carried in theirs? The tragedy is that there is no one to blame. There is no grand villain. There is just the crushing weight of expectation and the cold reality of power. A promise made to a nation is often a promise broken to a person. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, let the image of the wedding banners fade. They are old now, their colors bleached by the sun. The courtyard is empty. The mist has turned into a soft, gray rain that washes away the footprints of the celebration. The queen is sitting by a window. She is watching the rain. She is not crying. She is simply existing. The forever she was promised has turned into an endless now. A now that is quiet, and still, and perfectly, boringly, tragic. The candles in your own room are low. The world outside is asleep. There are no more promises to keep, no more roles to play. You can let go of the stories of the palace. You can let the silence of the history books wrap around you like a heavy, velvet cloak. Breathe in the peace of the present. Feel the softness of your bed. The ignored queen has found her place in the archives. Her waiting is over. The king is dust. The promise is a faded line on a piece of parchment. Sleep now, in the quiet of the forgotten promise. Sleep while the rain continues to fall on the ancient stones. Sleep in the deep, rhythmic comfort of the night. The silence of a palace is not like the silence of a home. It is a heavy, layered quiet, filled with the ghosts of words that were never spoken. And sometimes, the most painful part of that silence is the one that sits on a writing desk. A pile of parchment, a bottle of dark ink, and a letter that will never receive a reply. Tonight, let us drift into the world of the written word. Into the lonely hours of the night when the only companion a queen has is her own thoughts, poured out onto paper in the hope that someone, somewhere, still cares. Imagine a small room tucked away in a corner of a Victorian estate or a high tower in a medieval fortress. The walls are lined with books that no one reads, their leather bindings smelling of dust and centuries. In the center of the room sits a queen. The candlelight is the only thing moving, flickering against the silver inkwell and the stack of unused envelopes. She is writing to her husband. He is only 3 rooms away, or perhaps he is across the border in a military camp. It doesn't matter where he is, because the distance between them is not measured in miles, but in indifference. In the boring reality of these tragic lives, communication was a one-way street. She writes about her day. She writes about the garden, how the lilies are finally blooming, their white petals looking like stars against the green. She writes about their children, the small things they said, the way the youngest son has started to walk like his father. She writes to remind him that she exists. But the reply never comes. Think of the process of waiting for a letter in the 18th or 19th century. It is the ultimate exercise in patience. Every morning, she looks at the silver tray where the mail is placed. She sees the official reports, the tax documents, the invitations to balls she doesn't want to attend. But the handwriting she is looking for is never there. Day after day, the tray remains empty of the one thing she needs. As you breathe in the stillness of the night, imagine the weight of those unread letters. They are stored in a small wooden box, tied with a silk ribbon that has started to fray. Each letter is a piece of her soul, sent out into the void. After a while, she stops writing about the garden. She starts writing about her fears. The way the palace feels like a tomb at night. The way she forgets what her own voice sounds like because she has no one to talk to. But the king is busy. He has secretaries who open his mail. They see her letters, they see the familiar handwriting, and they set them aside. The queen is being emotional again, they might whisper. There is no need to trouble His Majesty with these trifles. And so, the letters are stacked in a dark drawer, unread, unloved, and forgotten. The tragedy of the unanswered letter is the slow death of hope. At first, she makes excuses for him. He is tired. He is under a lot of pressure. The mail was lost in the rain. But eventually, the excuses run out. The silence becomes too loud to ignore. Consider the Flemish Renaissance paintings of women reading letters. The light usually comes from a single window, illuminating the paper in their hands. They look so peaceful, so absorbed. But imagine the painting of a woman writing a letter she knows will be ignored. Her face would be different. Her shoulders would be slumped. The ink would have a blotch where she paused for too long, wondering if she should even bother finishing the sentence. In the Victorian era, the etiquette of letter writing was a ritual of its own. The choice of paper, the color of the wax seal, the style of the calligraphy. It was a boring task that filled the long, empty mornings. For the ignored queen, this ritual becomes a form of meditation. The scratching of the nib against the paper is a rhythmic sound, scritch, scritch, scritch. It is the only evidence that she is still there. As the night deepens around you, think of the letters that were found centuries later. Historians open them with white gloves, marveling at the preserved ink. They read the desperate pleas for a single word of kindness. They read the descriptions of a lonely life lived in the shadow of a crown. And they realized that the king never even broke the seal. The letters remained closed for 300 years. The secrets they held, the love they offered, it all stayed trapped in the fold of the parchment. The boring history of a palace is built on these silences. For every grand speech recorded in the archives, there are 1,000 letters that were never answered. For every victory on the battlefield, there is a woman in a quiet room, waiting for a messenger who never arrives. Imagine the queen finally stopping. One night, she sits at her desk, she picks up the pen, and she just stops. She looks at the blank page. She looks at the candle as it melts into a pool of wax. She realizes that the silence is her answer. She closes the inkwell for the last time. The clicking of the lid is the sound of a door closing on her heart. The tragedy is now complete. She no longer waits. She no longer hopes. She simply moves through the halls like a ghost, a woman who has run out of words. Let the image of the writing desk fade now. The ink has dried into a dull, dark stain. The parchment has turned yellow with age. The letters are just objects now, artifacts of a loneliness that has long since passed into the earth. Breathe slowly, and let the rhythm of the history lull you. There are no more letters to write tonight. No more trays to check. The silence of the palace is finally a peaceful one, because the waiting is over. The story has found its final period. The world outside your window is still. The shadows in your room are soft and kind. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. You don't need a reply. You are here, in the quiet, in the safety of the present moment. Sleep now, while the archives are silent. Sleep, while the old letters rest in their boxes. Sleep, in the deep, rhythmic comfort of a night that asks for nothing but your rest. We have explored the silence of unanswered letters, but now we must enter a silence that is far more dangerous. This is the story of a woman who was traded for a ceasefire. A woman whose wedding ring was forged from the iron of melted cannons. This is married for peace. Living in war. Close your eyes now, and let your mind travel to the borderlands of the late medieval era. Imagine a castle built on a jagged cliff, a place where the wind never stops whispering through the arrow slits in the stone. The air here is thin and cold, and it smells of pine needles and damp earth. Inside these walls, a queen is living out a tragedy that no one dares to speak of. She was the sacrifice. That is the word the chroniclers used, though they whispered it behind their hands. 2 kingdoms had been at each other's throats for 100 years. Generations of sons had died in the mud of the border valleys. And then, one day, the kings decided they had bled enough. They looked at their children, and they saw a solution. The wedding was a strange, tense affair. There was no joy in the streets, only a cautious, weary relief. The bride wore white, but the groom wore his armor beneath his surcoat. They exchanged vows while the smoke from the last burnt village was still visible on the horizon. They were married to stop the killing. But as the months turned into years, the queen realized that while the armies had stopped marching, the war had simply moved indoors. It was now being fought in the hallways, in the dining chambers, and in the very bed they shared. Think of the boring tension of a hostile household. Imagine the queen sitting at a long, oak table. She is surrounded by the advisors of her husband. These are men who, only a year ago, were leading charges against her father's troops. They look at her with eyes filled with old grudges. To them, she is not their queen. She is the daughter of the enemy. She is a spy who sleeps in the king's chambers. Every meal is a battlefield. The way she holds her fork, the way she speaks the language of her new home, the way she prays in the chapel. Everything is scrutinized. If she is too quiet, they say she is plotting. If she is too cheerful, they say she is mocking their losses. She lives in a state of permanent, boring siege. As you breathe slowly, let the rhythm of her life settle over you. Her days are spent in a series of endless, repetitive rituals designed to keep the peace. She must visit the hospitals to show she cares for the soldiers she once called enemies. She must sit through long, dull council meetings where they discuss the reparations her father still owes. She sits there, her hands folded in her lap, tracing the veins on her skin, waiting for the clock to strike the next hour. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance painting, imagine her standing by a window that looks out toward her homeland. The mountains in the distance are blue and hazy. The artist captures the way her hand grips the stone window sill. Her knuckles are white. She is looking at the path she took to get here, a path that is now close to her forever. Behind her, in the shadows of the room, stands a guard. He is there to protect her, but she knows he is also there to watch her. She is a prisoner of the peace she created. The Victorian historians often romanticized these unions, but the reality was a long, slow grind of loneliness. Imagine a queen in the 1800s, married to a foreign Kaiser or Tsar to prevent a continental war. She lives in a palace where no one speaks her mother tongue. She walks through galleries filled with portraits of her husband's ancestors, men who grew rich by conquering her own people. The war is in the whispers. It's in the way the servants hesitate before obeying her. It's in the way her husband looks at her after a bad day at the ministry. When the taxes are low, he is kind. When the border tensions rise, he is cold. His affection is tied to the movement of troops. If her father makes a mistake in a treaty, she is the one who pays for it in the silence of the evening. Think of the boring hours of the afternoon. The queen is in the library. The room is filled with the smell of old paper and beeswax. She is reading a book of poetry from her home, but she has to hide it under a cover of leather so no one knows. She reads the same page over and over, until the words lose their meaning and become just shapes on the paper. The clock on the wall goes tick, tick, tick. This is the heartbeat of her tragedy. It's not a scream. It's a slow, rhythmic ticking of a life that is being used as a shield. She is the human barrier between two rages. And like any barrier, she is slowly being worn away by the friction. As the night grows deeper around you, imagine the winter in that border castle. The snow piles up against the doors, sealing everyone inside. The tension becomes thicker. The fire in the hearth is large, but it doesn't reach the corners of the room. The queen sits in the shadows. She listens to the wind. It sounds like the shouting of men in the distance, or the crying of horses. But it's just the wind. She realizes that even if the war never starts again, she will never be at peace. She is a citizen of nowhere. She is the bridge that everyone walks across, but no one stops to live on. The tragedy of Married for Peace is that the peace is for everyone else, but her. The farmers go back to their fields. The merchants go back to their shops. The kings go back to their hunts. But she stays in the war. She stays in the suspicious looks, the guarded conversations, and the cold bed. Let the image of the border castle fade now. The snow is covering the stones, softening the sharp edges of the towers. The cannons are long gone, turned into statues in city squares. The queen is no longer a sacrifice. She is just a line in a history book that most people skip over. But you are here with her in the quiet. You understand the weight of the silence she carried. You can feel the stillness of her long afternoons. And as you feel that stillness, let it become your own. The boring details of the past are a lullaby. The repetitive days, the endless waiting, the quiet corridors. Let them pull you down, deeper into the softness of your bed. There are no more borders to guard tonight. No more treaties to sign. The war is over, and the peace is finally yours. The air in your room is still. The shadows are gentle. You are safe from the rages of the world. You are just a soul, drifting in the vast, dark ocean of time. There is a specific kind of coldness that sets into a palace when the candlelight shifts from the queen's chambers to another wing of the building. It is not the coldness of winter, but the chill of being eclipsed. Tonight, we observe the quiet, agonizing transition of power that happens not through a coup, but through the slow withdrawal of a king's attention. This is the story of the queen who remained on the throne, while someone else took her place in the light. Imagine a gallery of mirrors in a 17th century palace. The glass is imperfect, slightly wavy, reflecting the world in a way that feels like a dream. The queen walks through this gallery alone. She is dressed in the finest Flemish lace, her neck is adorned with pearls that could buy a city, but the mirrors show a woman who is becoming transparent. At the other end of the palace, there is laughter. There is the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of a lute being played with a playful, light-hearted rhythm. That is where the king is. He is not with his wife, the woman whose lineage is ancient and whose dowry was a kingdom. He is with the mistress, a woman who holds no crown, but holds all the influence. In the boring reality of court life, this was not just a scandal, it was an atmosphere. It was a fog that settled over the queen's daily life. Think of the morning ritual. The queen is woken up by her ladies-in-waiting. They are quiet today. They move with a careful, hesitant grace. They know what the queen knows, but no one speaks of it. As they lace up her corset, the queen looks at the empty space beside her bed. The silk sheets are smooth, undisturbed. The king hasn't visited these rooms in months. She spends her morning sitting for a portrait. The artist is meticulous. He spends an hour just mixing the right shade of blue for her dress. But he avoids her eyes. He knows that his next commission is to paint the other woman, the one who now sits on the king's right hand at the hunting lodge. The queen sits perfectly still. She has become an expert at stillness. If she doesn't move, perhaps the pain of being replaced won't find her. As you breathe in the stillness of your own room, imagine the boring power play of the dining room. The queen sits at the head of the table. The mistress is seated nearby, perhaps even given a position of honor by the king's decree. The courtiers watch them like hawks. To whom does the king speak first? To whom does he offer the finest cut of meat? The queen eats her meal in small, mechanical bites. The silver fork feels heavy in her hand. She listens to the mistress tell a joke that makes the king laugh in a way the queen has never heard. It is a bright, sharp sound that cuts through the formal silence of the hall. The queen simply smiles, a thin, polite ghost of a smile, and asks the servant for more water. The tragedy of being replaced is the loss of one's purpose. A queen is meant to be the center of the court, the sun around which the social world revolves. But when a mistress enters the picture, the gravity shifts. The courtiers begin to drift toward the other room. The invitations to the queen's private tea parties become fewer. The hallway outside her door becomes quieter, while the hallway outside the mistress's apartment is crowded with people seeking favors. In the Victorian era, this replacement was more subtle, more hidden behind the boring mask of respectability. The queen would be sent to a summer palace for her health. The king would remain in the city, attending to business. Everyone understood the code. The queen would spend her days walking through manicured gardens, tracing the patterns of the hedges with her eyes, while the world she was supposed to rule moved on without her. Think of the boring hours of the night. The queen lies in her vast, lonely bed. She listens to the sounds of the palace. The distant closing of a carriage door. The muffled laughter of guards. She realizes that she is a relic, an ornament that is still respected, but no longer used. She is a broken crown that is kept in a glass case for show. As the night grows deeper, let your mind focus on the small details of her room. The embroidery frame beside the window. The needle is still stuck in a half-finished petal of a rose. The silk thread is a deep, dusty crimson. She hasn't touched it in weeks. What is the point of creating beauty when no one is there to see it? The tragedy of the replaced queen is the silence of her protest. She cannot scream. She cannot leave. She must remain the dignified center of a hollow world. She must watch another woman wear the jewels that were meant for her, and hear another woman's name whispered in the corridors of power. She is the ultimate witness to her own disappearance. Let the image of the mirrored gallery fade. The candles have burned down, leaving only a trail of white smoke in the air. The laughter from the other wing has died away. The mistress, the king, the courtiers, they are all gone. They are just names on a crumbling family tree now. The queen's long, quiet nights are finally over. The weight of the pearls and the lace has been lifted. The space where she felt invisible is now filled with the soft, dark emptiness of time. The world outside is hushed. The stars are moving slowly across the sky, oblivious to the heartbreaks of the past. You are safe in this moment. You are not a symbol, you are not a pawn, you are simply a person breathing in the dark. Allow the tension in your hands to melt away. Let your thoughts become as light as the dust motes in an old library. The story of the replaced queen has reached its final, silent, chapter. There are no more rivals to watch, no more empty tables to sit at. Close the door on the palace tonight. Walk away from the mirrors and the gold. Find your own center in the stillness of the present. The history is tucked away, and the night is yours to keep. The celebration of a royal wedding is usually a symphony of light and music, but tonight, the air feels different. There is a metallic tang in the breeze, a sharpness that cuts through the scent of the roasting meats and the spilled wine. We are stepping into the year 1572. A warm August night in Paris, where the bells of the city are about to ring for a reason that has nothing to do with prayer. This is the story of a wedding that was meant to heal a nation, but instead, it stained the pages of history with a crimson that never truly faded. Imagine the streets of the city. They are narrow, winding, and tonight, they are dangerously crowded. Thousands of people have traveled from the countryside to witness the union of a Catholic princess and a Protestant king. It was supposed to be the Great Peace, a marriage that would act as a suture, sewing together the jagged wounds of a religious war. But in the shadows of the timber-framed houses, men are checking the edges of their blades. Think of the boring hours leading up to the tragedy. The late afternoon sun is hitting the stained glass of the cathedral, throwing long, distorted shadows of saints across the stone floor. The bride, Marguerite, stands at the center of this kaleidoscope of light. Her dress is a marvel of the late Renaissance, stiff with silver embroidery and weighed down by thousands of tiny river pearls. She feels like she is wearing armor, not a wedding gown. Every few minutes, she has to take a deep, careful breath. The corset is so tight that it feels like a hand gripping her ribs. She looks at her groom, Henry. He is a man of the mountains, a man who smells of leather and rain, and he looks as out of place in this gilded cage as a wolf in a garden. They are the two most important people in the world today, and yet, they are merely the bait in a trap they didn't set. As you settle deeper into your bed, let the rhythm of the city's waiting settle over you. Tick, 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 goes the clock in the royal apartments. The ceremony is over. The vows have been spoken in a tense, hushed Latin. Now comes the feast. The banquet hall is a cavern of flickering orange light. Hundreds of candles are melting, their wax dripping like slow, heavy tears onto the silver candelabras. The sound of the crowd outside is a low, constant hum, like the sound of a distant ocean. Inside, the nobility are eating, but no one is truly relaxed. They watch each other over the rims of their golden goblets. A hand lingers too long near a hilt. A whisper is cut short when a guard passes by. The boring details of the meal become the focus of the queen's evening. She watches the way the grease congeals on a platter of pheasant. She counts the number of times her mother, the calculating Catherine, leans over to whisper to the king. She notices that some of the guests are leaving early, slipping out into the humid night air without saying goodbye. She doesn't know that the gates of the city are being locked. One by one, the heavy iron bars are sliding into place. Clang, clang, clang. The city is becoming a container. Night falls, thick and heavy. The queen is led to her chambers. This is the moment where the deadly part of the political wedding begins to seep through the floorboards. She is exhausted. The weight of the day, the weight of the crown, it has left her numb. She dismisses her ladies. She wants the silence. But the silence is wrong. It isn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping palace. It is a held breath. Think of the sounds that start to filter through the window. It begins with a single bell. Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. A sharp, repetitive, clanging that cuts through the dark. And then, the shouting starts. It isn't the shouting of revelry. It is the sound of a wedding turning into a massacre. In the style of a dark Victorian oil painting, imagine the queen standing by her bed. She is still in her shifts, her hair loose around her shoulders. The moonlight shows her face, frozen in a mask of realization. The great peace was a lie. Her marriage was the signal. The guest list for her wedding has become a list of targets. She hears footsteps in the hallway. Rapid. Heavy. They are not the footsteps of servants. A man bursts into her room, wounded, reaching for her. He is a guest from her wedding, someone she danced with only hours ago. He is looking for sanctuary in the queen's bedchamber. But in a political wedding that has turned deadly, there is no sanctuary. The tragedy of this night is the betrayal of the ritual. A wedding is a promise of life. To use it as a weapon is to break the very foundation of the world. The queen stands between the dying man and the soldiers, her white nightdress stained with the reality of her family's ambition. She is the bride of the bloodbath. As the night in your own room grows still, imagine the aftermath. The sun rises over Paris, but it doesn't bring light. It only reveals the cost of the power marriage. The streets are quiet now, but it is the quiet of a graveyard. The banners are torn. The wine in the gutters has been replaced by something else. The queen remains. She is still married. The treaty is technically fulfilled. But the woman who stood at the altar is gone. In her place is someone who understands that in the world of broken crowns, even a kiss can be a death sentence. Let the image of the Paris streets fade away. The bells have stopped ringing. The centuries have washed the stones clean. The tragedy of 1572 is now just a chapter in a leather-bound book, a story told to remind us of the darkness that can hide behind a silk veil. Your room is safe. Your door is locked against the past. There are no bells waiting to ring for you. There are no political traps in your blankets. You are free from the weight of the silver embroidery and the pearls. Feel the coolness of the air as it moves across your face. Let the tension in your jaw dissolve into the pillows. The story of the deadly wedding has found its end. The players have left the stage. The candles have all flickered out. The history is a heavy curtain that has been drawn shut for the night. You don't need to look behind it. You don't need to remember the shouting. You only need to hear the rhythm of your own heart, steady, slow, and at peace. Leave the palace behind. Walk away from the narrow streets and the cold cathedrals. Find the garden of your own dreams, where the flowers don't hide any secrets, and the night is a long, soft, velvet embrace. The ink is dry on the page. The story is still. And you are finally, beautifully, alone in the dark. The violence of the deadly wedding has passed into the history books, and now we find ourselves in a place where the tragedy is not blood, but beauty. A beauty so absolute and so unchanging that it becomes a weight. This is the story of the woman who lives in the center of the world, and yet is forbidden from seeing it. This is Trapped in a Golden Palace. Close your eyes, and let the walls of your room expand into the vast, cold marble halls of Versailles or the Winter Palace. Imagine floors so polished that they look like dark water. Imagine ceilings so high that the shadows of the morning never quite leave the corners. You are surrounded by gold leaf, by mirrors, by the finest silk that human hands can weave. And you are completely, utterly alone. Think of the boring rhythm of a day in a golden cage. The queen does not wake up to the sound of birds, she wakes up to the sound of a clock. A gold-plated clock that sits on a marble mantelpiece, ticking away the seconds of a life that belongs to the state. The morning ritual is not a start, it is a performance. She is dressed by 12 different women. One to hold the chemise. One to lace the stays. One to present the jewelry on a velvet cushion. They move like ghosts around her. They don't speak to her as a friend, they handle her as if she were a precious, fragile, porcelain doll. She stands there for an hour, her arms held out, her eyes fixed on a single spot on the wallpaper. In the boring reality of this palace, every inch of gold is a bar. As you breathe in the cool air of the night, think of the texture of her life. The silk of her gown is so heavy that it makes a soft, dragging sound on the floor. Swish, swish, swish. She walks down a gallery that is a quarter-mile long. Every few feet, there is a guard. He stands perfectly still. He doesn't look at her. He looks through her. She is a symbol of the crown, and symbols do not need conversation. She spends her afternoon in a room filled with flowers. The scent is overwhelming, a thick, sweet, cloying smell of lilies and roses that have been cut from the greenhouse and forced to bloom in the dead of winter. They are beautiful, but they are dying. Just like the atmosphere of the palace. Everything is perfectly preserved, and yet, nothing is alive. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance master, imagine her sitting by a window. The glass is thick and expensive, making the garden outside look like a hazy, distorted dream. She can see the fountains. She can see the rows of orange trees in their white boxes. She can see the peasants in the distance, moving like ants across the fields. She envies the ants. They can leave. They can walk past the gates. The Golden Palace is a masterpiece of isolation. To the world outside, she is the luckiest woman alive. They see the gold on the roof and they think, she must be happy. They don't see the boring emptiness of her schedule. 2 hours of reading. 1 hour of prayer. 3 hours of sitting for a portrait that looks exactly like the one painted last year. As the night grows deeper around you, let the stillness of the palace settle into your bones. Tick, tick, tick. The clock is the heartbeat of her prison. Time doesn't fly here. It crawls across the marble floors. It lingers in the heavy velvet curtains. It hides in the reflections of the mirrors. Sometimes, the queen stands in front of a mirror and realizes she doesn't know which one is the real her, and which one is the reflection. They both look the same. They both wear the same crown. They both have the same tired, hollow eyes. The tragedy is that there is no escape. The gates are not there to keep people out, they are there to keep her in. If she walks to the edge of the property, the guards will honorably escort her back. If she speaks to a stranger, her words will be reported to the king within the hour. Even her thoughts feel like they are being watched by the statues in the hallway. Think of the Victorian era, where the golden cage became even more psychological. The etiquette. The rules of what a queen can and cannot do. She cannot go to a shop. She cannot walk alone in a park. She cannot laugh too loudly. Every action is a link in a chain made of gold. It is a soft chain, a beautiful chain, but it is a chain nonetheless. Imagine the night in the palace. The guests have all gone to their own chambers. The great chandeliers have been lowered and the candles extinguished. Only a few small lamps remain, casting a flickering, amber light on the gold leaf. The queen lies in her bed, which is so large that she feels like a child lost in a forest of pillows. She listens to the silence. It is a heavy, thick, royal silence. It is the silence of a woman who has everything, and yet owns nothing. Not her time. Not her body. Not her future. The boring history of the Golden Palace is a story of a long, slow vanishing. Year after year, the queen becomes more like the furniture, more like the paintings, more like the gold on the walls. She is becoming an artifact. Let the image of the vast hallways fade now. The gold is dimming in the dark. The mirrors are no longer reflecting anything. The palace is settling into the earth, its tragedies becoming a part of the dust. The queen who was trapped is finally free, because the walls have crumbled and the clocks have all stopped. You are not in a palace tonight. You are in your own space. Your walls are kind. Your door is a choice, not a cage. You can breathe without permission. You can dream without a schedule. Feel the weight of your own blankets, soft, warm, and simple. No gold thread to scratch your skin. No heavy velvet to stifle the air. Just the pure, uncomplicated comfort of the night. The story of the golden prison is over. The key has been turned in the lock for the last time. And as you drift away, let the silence of the history books be your companion. It is a quiet silence now. A peaceful silence. A silence that doesn't ask for anything but your rest. Sleep now, away from the gold and the marble. Sleep, where the air is fresh and the dreams are wide. Sleep. The golden bars of the palace were silent, but as we move into the 10th chapter of our journey, that silence begins to grow teeth. Tonight, we explore a tragedy that happens within the most intimate of spaces. It is the story of a woman who looks across the breakfast table, or across the expanse of a shared bed, and realizes that the person who promised to protect her has become the one she needs protection from. This is the chilling reality of a husband who became an enemy. Imagine a vast, dimly lit bedroom in a Victorian manor, or perhaps a fortified castle in the north of England. The walls are thick, the windows are narrow, and the air is heavy with the smell of old oak and cold iron. This is not a room for rest. It is a room of vigilance. In the boring history of royal disasters, an enemy is usually someone with a different flag, someone across a border. But for many queens, the enemy was much closer. It was the man who held the power to lock her in her rooms. The man who could take away her children with a single stroke of a pen. The man who controlled the very air she breathed. Think of the gradual shift. It doesn't happen in a single afternoon. It is a slow, eroding process. It begins with a look of coldness where there used to be indifference. It continues with a word, a correction made in front of the servants, a sharp, biting comment about her family or her mind. And eventually, it becomes a wall of hostility that she must climb every single day. The boring details of her morning are now tinged with a quiet dread. She waits for the sound of his footsteps. She has learned to tell his mood by the way his boots strike the floor. A heavy, rhythmic tread means he is brooding. A quick, sharp strike means he is looking for a reason to be angry. She sits at her dressing table, her hands trembling as she pins her hair. She must look perfect. Perfection is her only shield. If she is perfect, perhaps he will leave her alone for one more day. As you feel the weight of your own blankets, think of the psychological exhaustion of this life. She is playing a game of chess where the other person owns all the pieces. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance painting, imagine her face as she looks at him during a formal dinner. Her expression is a mask of marble. She doesn't let her eyes meet his. She looks at the reflection of the candles in the silver soup tureen. She sees him not as a husband, but as a predator who is currently, temporarily, at rest. The tragedy of the husband enemy is that there is no court of appeal. He is the law. He is the judge. He is the jailer. In the Victorian era, if a king or a nobleman decided his wife was difficult, he didn't need a battlefield to destroy her. He only needed a doctor. Or a decree. He could declare her mad, and have her removed to a wing of the palace where the windows were barred and the doors had no handles on the inside. The boring hours of her isolation become an endless loop of waiting. She sits in a high-backed chair, staring at the dust motes as they dance in a single sliver of sunlight. She remembers the wedding. She remembers the vows. They feel like they belong to a different person, in a different life. The man she married is gone, replaced by a stranger who views her as an obstacle to his power. Think of the small, repetitive actions she takes to keep her mind sane. She counts the number of roses on the carpet. She recites poems in her head, over and over, the words becoming a rhythmic lullaby in the dark. She traces the grain of the wood on her desk. Up and down, following the curves of the oak, feeling the coldness of the varnish. Outside, the world goes on. People think of them as a great royal couple. They see their names together on documents. They see them appearing on balconies. But inside the palace, the war is absolute. It is a war of silence. A war of locked doors. A war where a single whispered rumor can lead to the scaffold. Imagine a winter night when the frost is thick on the glass, turning the world outside into a white, blurred mystery. The queen lies awake. She hears the king in the next room. The sound of paper being torn. The sound of a glass being put down on a table with a sharp, final clink. Every sound is a threat. Every silence is a question. She realizes that her crown is not a symbol of her rank, it is the target on her back. He doesn't want her beside him, he wants her gone so he can marry someone else, someone who brings more land, more ships, or more obedience. This is the most boring and yet most terrifying part of history. The slow, bureaucratic dismantling of a human soul. No swords are drawn. No blood is spilled in the hallway. Instead, it is done through letters, through lawyers, through the slow withdrawal of money, servants, and dignity. As the night deepens in your own room, let the image of the hostile palace fade. The stone walls are cold, but your bed is warm. The footsteps in the hallway are long gone, silenced by the centuries. The king and the queen are now just two statues lying side by side in a cathedral, their hands folded in a peace they never knew in life. The tragedy is over. The enemy has been defeated by time. The locks have all rusted away, and the doors are wide open. Breathe out all the tension of the story. Feel the softness of the pillow beneath your head. You are safe from the politics and the predators. You are in a world where the night is a friend, and the silence is a gift. Let the history sink into the shadows. You don't need to be vigilant anymore. You don't need to listen for footsteps. The only sound you need to hear is the quiet, rhythmic breathing of the world as it sleeps. The story of the husband who became an enemy is just a flicker in the long dark of the past. It is a candle that has finally burned out. Sleep now, while the marble statues keep their watch. Sleep, while the ink on the old decrees fades into nothing. Sleep in the deep, soft safety of the present moment. We have walked through halls of neglect and palaces of gold, but tonight we step onto the fragile bridge of a dream. This is a story that exists in the spaces between the battle lines. A story of a connection that should never have been made, in a time when a border was not just a line on a map, but a wall of iron and fire. This is love across enemy kingdoms. Imagine a borderland in the late medieval era, a place where two kingdoms meet at the bank of a slow, dark river. On one side, the banners are blue and silver. On the other, they are crimson and gold. Between them, there has been nothing but silence and blood for 100 years. But in the quiet hours of a summer night, the river does not care about kings or crowns. It only reflects the stars. In the boring history of war, we often forget the individuals caught in the machinery of statecraft. Imagine a princess of the Blue Kingdom and a prince of the Crimson one. They met, perhaps, during a brief ceasefire or a neutral hunt in the deep, ancient forests that span both lands. It was a moment that history was never supposed to record. A single look, a few shared words in a language they both struggled to understand. From that moment on, their lives became a secret. Think of the boring logistics of a love that is forbidden by law. The waiting. The endless, quiet waiting for a messenger who might never come. The prince sits in his stone tower, watching the horizon. He isn't looking for invading armies. He is looking for a single, tiny, flash of light from a mirror across the valley. A signal that says, "I am here. I am still breathing. I have not forgotten." As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the forest settle over you. The queen, as she has now become, spends her days performing the duties of a woman at war. She visits the forges. She inspects the grain stores. She listens to her advisors plan the destruction of the kingdom she has come to love in secret. She sits at the council table, her face a mask of cold porcelain, while her heart is miles away, across the river, in a tent or a palace she may never enter. Every word she speaks for her country feels like a betrayal of her soul. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance painting, imagine her in her private chapel. The light is dim, filtered through heavy, dark-toned glass. She is kneeling, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles are like white marble. She isn't praying for victory. She is praying for a stalemate. She is praying that the war stays boring. Because as long as the war is a series of small skirmishes and long winters of waiting, he is alive. If the war ends, it means one of them has lost everything. The tragedy of love across enemy kingdoms is the impossibility of a future. There is no world where they can sit together by a fire. There is no morning where they can wake up without the sound of trumpets calling men to kill. They are like two stars on opposite sides of the galaxy, pulled together by gravity, but held apart by the void. Think of the boring details of their secret correspondence. A letter hidden in the hollow of an old oak tree. The paper is damp, the ink is blurred by the humidity of the woods. The words are simple, because they have to be. The winter is long. The roses are dead. I remember the bridge. They don't write of passion. They write of the boring passage of time. They share the only thing they have in common, the same sky, the same moon, the same cold wind that blows across both their lands without asking for a passport. As the night grows deeper in your own room, imagine a Victorian-era version of this tragedy. A princess of an empire married to a duke, while the man she truly loves is a revolutionary or a soldier for the opposing side. She attends the opera. She wears the family diamonds. She smiles for the photographers. But in her pocket, she carries a small, worn-out photograph of a man who is technically her enemy. She spends hours in her library, looking at maps. She traces the line of the frontier with her finger. Up and down. Over the mountains. Through the rivers. She knows the geography of his land better than she knows her own gardens. She knows the names of his villages. She knows the height of his hills. To her, that enemy map is the only home she has ever wanted. The boring tragedy is the slow realization that they will grow old in separate palaces. Year after year, the letters become fewer. The oak tree is cut down for firewood. The mirrors are broken or lost. The memory of the person across the border begins to fade, like a portrait left in the sun. They become ghosts to each other, even while they are still alive. One day, the war actually ends. There is a grand treaty. There is a parade. The borders are opened. But it is too late. They are no longer the people who met in the forest. They are tired, gray-haired monarchs who have spent their lives building walls. They might pass each other in a hallway during a diplomatic summit, and they will nod politely, and they will never say a word about the bridge, or the river, or the stars. The tragedy is not the death of the lovers, it is the death of the love, smothered by the weight of two crowns. Let the image of the dark river fade now. The banners have all turned to dust. The kingdoms have merged and split a dozen times since then. The secret letters have rotted away in the earth. The tragedy of the enemy kingdoms is a quiet one now, a story told by the wind in the trees. Your own borders are safe tonight. There is no one you are forbidden to love. There is no river you cannot cross. You are in a world of peace, where the only territory that matters is the soft, warm space of your bed. Feel the silence of the room. It is a kind silence. It doesn't hold any secrets. It doesn't require any masks. You can let your heart be still. You can let your mind be empty. The history has moved on. The battle lines have vanished. The princes and princesses are at rest, sleeping in the same earth, regardless of the flags they once flew. Breathe in the cool, steady air. Let the tension in your shoulders melt into the darkness. You are not a pawn in a game of kings. You are just a soul, drifting toward the horizon of sleep. The ink is dry. The map is folded. The story of the enemy love has found its final, quiet period. Sleep now, while the stars watch over every land. Sleep while the rivers flow in silence. Sleep in the deep, soft comfort of a night that knows no enemies. We have seen the tragedies of war and the bitterness of enemies, but tonight we enter a silence that is perhaps the most profound of all. It is the story of a separation that happened without a single word being raised. A divorce that didn't take place in a courtroom, but in the long, empty spaces of a shared palace. This is the silent royal divorce. Imagine a grand Victorian estate during the late autumn. The leaves are a dull, rusty brown, carpeting the long driveway where no carriages have passed for days. Inside the house, everything is in its proper place. The silver is polished. The servants move with a practiced, ghostly efficiency. But if you listen closely, you will hear the sound of a vacuum. A void where a marriage used to be. In the boring history of the elite, a scandal was often considered more dangerous than a tragedy. To avoid the gossip of the tabloids and the judgment of the church, many royal couples chose a life of silent separation. They remained married in name. They lived under the same roof. But they had stopped being a we decades ago. Think of the boring geometry of their daily lives. The king lives in the East Wing. The queen lives in the West Wing. Between them lies a vast expanse of marble corridors, libraries, and staterooms that they only cross for appearances. Their lives are a series of calculated misses. As you feel the softness of your pillow, imagine the queen's morning. She takes her tea in a small morning room that smells of dried roses and old books. She looks out at the gardens. She knows that the king is currently 300 yards away, eating his own breakfast in total silence. They use the same servants. They breathe the same air. But they have not looked each other in the eye for 5 years. The tragedy of the silent divorce is the preservation of the mask. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance painting, imagine them during a formal state reception. They stand side by side on the dais. The artist captures the perfection of their clothes. Her silk gown, his military medals. They look like the pillars of the nation. But look at the space between their hands. It is only an inch, but that inch is a canyon that no one can cross. They are two islands, frozen in a sea of ceremony. They speak to each other only when the world is watching. The weather is turning cold. Yes, the frost will be heavy tonight. These are the only words they exchange for weeks. The boring details of their separation are managed by secretaries. Notes are sent back and forth between the wings. His Majesty will be attending the opera on Tuesday. Her Majesty will be visiting the hospital on Wednesday. They coordinate their lives so they never have to be in the same room alone. They are masters of the near Mississippi. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the psychological weight of this arrangement. It is a life lived in a waiting room. The Queen spends her evenings in her private library. The fire is small, just enough to take the chill off the air. She reads. She sews. She listens to the wind in the chimney. She has everything she could ever want, except for a conversation that means something. She is a widow whose husband is still alive. In the Victorian era, this was the ultimate, boring sacrifice for the crown. To stay in a dead marriage for the sake of the institution. They sacrificed their chance at happiness for the sake of the line. They became symbols, and symbols do not need love. They only need to be permanent. Imagine the night in the palace. The servants have retired to their own quarters. The lights in the hallways are dimmed. The Queen walks to the door that connects her wing to his. It is a heavy, mahogany door with a brass handle that hasn't been turned in years. She puts her hand on the wood. She can feel the coldness of the timber. She doesn't turn the handle. She doesn't even want to. She just stands there, listening to the silence on the other side. The tragedy is not that they hate each other. Hate is a loud, passionate emotion. The tragedy is that they have become indifferent. They have become two strangers who happen to share a history and a last name. They are the ghosts of a promise that neither of them remembers making. One day, the history books will record that they died within a year of each other. People will say, they couldn't live without one another. But you and I, we know the truth in the silence of the night. They had been living without each other for half a century. Their deaths were just the final, boring, conclusion to a divorce that had finished years ago. Let the image of the cold, divided palace fade now. The mahogany doors have all been opened by museums. The corridors are filled with tourists who don't know the secrets of the wings. The silence of the silent divorce has finally been broken by time. Your own home is a place of connection. Your silence tonight is a peaceful choice, not a political one. You are not keeping up appearances for a kingdom. You are just a soul, allowing the day to dissolve into the dark. Feel the rhythm of the rain outside, or the stillness of the air in your room. It is a steady, comforting, honest silence. You can let go of the masks. You can let go of the roles you play for the world. The history of the silent divorce is just a whisper in a long, dark hallway. It is a story that has found its rest. The notes have all been burned. The chairs are empty. Breathe in the quiet. Breathe out the expectations. You are safe in the present. You are whole in the dark. Sleep now, while the empty palaces stand still. Sleep while the ghosts of the old kings and queens find their peace. Sleep in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that asks for nothing but your presence. The ink is dry. The door is closed. The story of the silent separation has reached its final, quiet period. We move now from the shared hallways of a silent divorce into the vast, stretching distances of a life lived entirely apart. This is a story of a marriage that exists only on paper, a union held together by the thin threads of a royal decree, while the people involved inhabit different worlds. This is the quiet reality of married, but living apart. Imagine a map of a vast empire. On one end, in a cold, gray city filled with stone monuments and winter fog, lives the king. On the other end, thousands of miles away, in a sun-drenched villa overlooking a turquoise sea, lives the queen. Between them lies an entire continent. Mountains, rivers, forests, and a lifetime of unspoken reasons why they can no longer share the same air. In the boring history of royal exile, this was often a strategic choice. It wasn't always a punishment. Sometimes, it was the only way to keep the crown stable. If the king and queen cannot agree, if their personalities are like fire and ice, then the solution is simple. You build them two different palaces, and you ensure that their paths never, ever cross. Think of the boring routine of the queen in her distant villa. Her days are measured by the movement of the sun across her terrace. She wakes to the smell of salt and lemon trees. She spends her mornings walking through the gardens, her white linen dress brushing against the lavender bushes with a soft, rhythmic swish, swish, swish. She is far from the intrigues of the capital. She is far from the cold eyes of the advisors. But she is also far from her identity. As you feel the weight of your own blankets, imagine the stillness of her afternoons. She sits for her portrait, perhaps in the style of a Victorian-era painting, with the sea as her backdrop. The artist captures the way she looks toward the horizon. Is she looking for a ship? Is she looking for a letter? Or is she simply looking at the empty space where her life was supposed to be? The tragedy of living apart is the slow fading of the other person's memory. After 10 years, she can no longer remember the sound of the king's laugh. She can no longer remember the color of his eyes when he is angry. He has become a name on a legal document. A face on a coin that she uses to buy bread in the local market. He is a ghost who is still breathing in a different time zone. In the boring reality of the capital, the king's life is equally solitary. He performs the rituals of state. He signs the decrees. He attends the banquets. At every dinner, there is an empty chair at the end of the long table. It is the queen's chair. It is kept there to remind the world that he is married. But it is never filled. The servants dust the chair every morning. They polish the silver in front of it. They place a fresh napkin beside the plate. It is a daily ritual for a woman who hasn't stepped foot in this room for 20 years. This empty chair is the most boring and yet most poignant monument to their failure. Think of the boring communication between them. Once a year, on their anniversary, a formal letter is sent from the king's secretary to the queen's secretary. His Majesty hopes that Her Majesty finds the climate agreeable. Her Majesty thanks His Majesty for his concern and sends her regards. These are the only words that bridge the continent. These are the only signs that the union still exists. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the psychological toll of being a wife in name only. The queen walks through her villa at night. The terracotta tiles are cool beneath her feet. She listens to the crickets in the garden. She has freedom, in a way. She can read what she wants. She can speak to whom she chooses. But she is always, always, under the shadow of the man she hasn't seen in decades. She cannot marry for love, because she is already married for politics. She cannot go back, because the king has made it clear that her presence is no longer required. She is trapped in a beautiful paradise, waiting for a life that was postponed indefinitely. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance master, imagine her sitting at a small table, writing her will. She has to decide what to do with the jewels that were given to her on her wedding day. The emeralds. The diamonds. They have been sitting in a velvet-lined box for half a century. To her, they are not precious stones. They are the anchors that kept her tied to a ship that never sailed. The tragedy is the waste of time. The boring passage of decades where nothing happens. No big fights. No grand reunions. Just the slow, steady, rhythmic washing of the sea against the shore. And the slow, steady ticking of a clock in a cold palace far away. One day, a messenger arrives at the villa. He is wearing the black livery of the king's household. He doesn't have to say a word. The queen knows why he is there. The king is dead. And after 30 years of living apart, she is finally legally alone. But she doesn't feel relief. She doesn't feel sadness. She simply feels tired. The boring drama is over. The union that existed only on paper has been dissolved by the earth. She will be brought back to the capital. She will be buried beside a man she didn't know, in a tomb they will share for eternity, even though they couldn't share a room for a single night. Let the image of the villa and the sea fade now. The lemon trees have grown wild. The palaces have become ruins. The distance between the king and the queen has been closed by the silence of history. Your own night is not divided by continents. You are here, whole and present. You don't have to live a life on paper. You don't have to wait for messengers from a distant world. Feel the rhythm of the air in your room. It is a quiet, steady, honest air. Let the tension in your mind dissolve into the darkness. You are safe from the roles and the rituals. You are just a soul, allowing the day to fade into the softness of the night. The history of the living apart marriage is just a long, slow sigh in the dark. It is a story that has found its rest. The letters have been filed away. The empty chairs have been removed. Breathe in the peace. Breathe out the weight of the past. You are safe in the present. You are finally, beautifully, at rest. Sleep now, while the sea continues to wash against the empty shores. Sleep, while the stone palaces crumble into the dust of time. Sleep, in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that asks for nothing but your quiet rest. The ink is dry. The map is folded. The story of the distant union has reached its final, quiet, period. We have walked through the distance of separated lives, but now we must enter a room where a decision is being made. A decision that will change the course of a life forever. This is the story of the bargain that every monarch must eventually face. The choice between the duty they owe to the blood and the love they owe to themselves. This is a crown that cost a heart. Imagine a private study in the late Victorian era, or perhaps a stone-walled chamber in a medieval castle. The only light comes from a single candle, its flame flickering in a draught that no one can find. On the table lies a crown. It is a masterpiece of gold and precious stones. It reflects the candlelight in a way that is almost blinding. But to the person sitting across from it, it doesn't look like jewelry. It looks like a heavy, golden cage. In the boring history of royalty, we often talk about what kings and queens gained. We talk about their lands, their titles, their victories. But we rarely talk about what they had to give up in exchange. To wear the crown, you must first empty your hands. You must let go of the things that make you human, so that you can become a symbol. Think of the boring morning of a great sacrifice. The king sits at his desk. He has a document in front of him. It is a marriage contract, or perhaps a decree of exile for the person he loves most in the world. His advisors are standing in the shadows, their faces unreadable. They tell him that the stability of the realm depends on his signature. They tell him that the line must be protected at all costs. The cost they talk about is never their own. It is always his. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the room settle over you. The king picks up the pen. It is a simple object, made of wood and steel. But as he holds it, it feels heavier than a broadsword. He knows that once the ink touches the parchment, his heart will belong to the state. He will no longer be a man who loves. He will be a king who rules. He signs the paper. The scratching of the nib is the only sound in the room. Scritch, scritch, scritch. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance painting, imagine the queen who is the victim of this bargain. She is standing in a garden, her hand resting on the sundial. She doesn't know yet that the decision has been made. The artist captures the peace on her face, a peace that is about to be shattered. The shadows of the trees are long and thin, reaching out like fingers to touch her dress. She is a part of the boring beauty of the afternoon, unaware that she has been traded for a piece of gold. The tragedy of a crown that cost a heart is the slow realization of the price. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the years that follow. The king wears the crown at the coronation. It fits perfectly. It looks magnificent. But every time he puts it on, he feels a phantom pain in his chest. He remembers the person he walked away from. He remembers the life he could have had if he had been born a commoner, a farmer, a merchant. He realizes that the crown is not sitting on his head, it is sitting on his soul. Think of the boring hours of his reign. The endless meetings about tax laws. The hours spent reviewing the military positions on a map. The formal dinners where he sits beside a woman he was forced to marry, while the memory of his true love sits like a ghost at the table. He performs every duty perfectly. He is called the just. He is called the great. But inside, he is a hollow shell of a man. He has traded the warmth of a hand for the coldness of a scepter. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the Victorian obsession with duty. The queen who wears black for 40 years, not just for her husband, but for the life she lost when she took the throne. She walks through the corridors of her palace, her black silk dress rustling against the carpets with a soft, rhythmic shh, shh. She is a monument to the crown. She is the perfect monarch. And she is the loneliest woman in the world. The boring tragedy is that the world never sees the sacrifice. They only see the gold. They see the portraits. They see the parades. They don't see the letters burned in the fireplace. They don't see the nights spent staring at a wall, wondering if the power was worth the price. The heart that was lost doesn't go away. It stays in the shadows of the palace. It haunts the dreams of the king. It whispers to him when he is alone in the chapel. It reminds him that while he owns the kingdom, he no longer owns himself. One day, at the end of a long and boring life, the king lies on his deathbed. The crown is sitting on a velvet cushion nearby. The doctors are whispering. The heirs are waiting in the hallway. The king looks at the crown one last time. He realizes that it never truly belonged to him. He was just its temporary keeper. And for that privilege, he gave away the only thing that was truly his. The crown stays. The heart is gone. Let the image of the flickering candle and the golden crown fade now. The kings and queens have long since turned to dust. The gold has been melted down or locked away in museums. The sacrifice is now just a footnote in a history book, a story told to people who will never have to choose between a throne and a heart. Your own life is not a bargain of state. You don't have to give up your heart for a title. Your choices are your own. Your love is your own. You are free from the weight of the golden cage. Feel the softness of your bed. It is a simple comfort, more valuable than any throne. Let the tension in your chest dissolve into the darkness. You don't have to be a symbol tonight. You don't have to be strong for a nation. You are just a soul, allowing the day to end in peace. The history of the heart and the crown is a long, slow sigh. It is a story that has found its rest. The documents have rotted. The ink has faded. The bargain is over. Breathe in the quiet. Breathe out the weight of expectations. You are safe in the present. You are whole in the dark. Sleep now, while the ancient crowns stay silent in their cases. Sleep, while the ghosts of the old kings find the love they lost. Sleep, in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that asks for nothing but your heart's rest. The ink is dry. The sacrifice is finished. The story of the heart and the crown has reached its final, quiet period. We have explored the sacrifices made for duty, but tonight, we enter the most private of rooms, only to find that even there, the shadows of betrayal have taken root. This is the story of the broken oath, the moment when the sanctity of the royal bedchamber was violated not by an enemy with a sword, but by a heart that chose to wander. This is betrayal inside the royal bed. Imagine a vast, high-ceilinged chamber in a Renaissance palace. The walls are covered in heavy silk damask, the color of crushed grapes in the moonlight. In the center of the room stands the royal bed, an enormous structure of carved oak, draped in velvet curtains that are thick enough to hide 1,000 secrets. The air is still, smelling of lavender sachets and the dying embers of a cedarwood fire. In the boring reality of history, the royal bed was never just a place for sleep. It was a theater of statecraft. It was where heirs were produced, where treaties were finalized, and where the future of dynasties was decided. To betray the trust of this room was not just a personal failure, it was an act of treason against the crown itself. Think of the boring hours of the night when the betrayal begins. The queen lies awake, watching the shadows of the bedpost stretch across the ceiling. Beside her, there is an emptiness. A space where her husband should be. He is not away at war. He is not in a council meeting. He is just elsewhere. The silence of the room is heavy. It is the silence of a woman who has stopped asking questions because she already knows the answers. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the palace settle over you. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance master, imagine the queen as she rises from her bed. She moves like a ghost, her white nightdress trailing behind her on the cold marble floor. She doesn't call for her ladies. She doesn't light a candle. She simply walks to the window, looking out at the darkened courtyard. She is looking for a light in a different wing of the palace. A light that shouldn't be on at 3 a.m. The tragedy of betrayal inside the royal bed is the slow eroding of dignity. The queen must wake up every morning and perform the boring rituals of royalty as if her world is not crumbling. She must sit beside the king at the council table. She must smile as he presents her with a new piece of jewelry, a gift intended to buy her silence. The diamonds are beautiful, but they feel like cold ice against her skin. Every time he touches her hand, she feels the ghost of another woman between them. Think of the Victorian era, where this betrayal was hidden behind even thicker layers of etiquette and lace. The queen is told by her advisors that men have their needs. She is told that she must be patient. She is told that as long as the public sees a united front, her private pain doesn't matter. She becomes a master of the boring facade. She spends her afternoons reading or embroidering, her needle moving in and out, a rhythmic, hypnotic task that keeps her from screaming. The stitches are perfect. The embroidery is a masterpiece. But the woman holding the needle is hollow. The betrayal is not always about another person. Sometimes, the betrayal is a secret kept within the bedchamber itself. A husband who plots against his wife's family while she sleeps beside him. A king who signs a death warrant for her brother, then returns to their shared room to talk about the weather. This is the ultimate betrayal, the use of intimacy as a mask for cold, political calculation. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the weight of the secrets kept in that oak bed. The whispers shared in the dark. The promises made that were never meant to be kept. The bed becomes a place of vigilance, not rest. The queen learns to sleep with one eye open, listening to the king's breathing, wondering what he is dreaming of, and if she is even in those dreams. The boring tragedy is that life goes on. Years pass. Children are born. Wars are won and lost. The betrayal becomes a permanent part of the furniture. It sits in the corner like a dusty statue. Everyone knows it is there, but no one speaks of it. The king and queen become two people who are together in every legal sense, but are strangers in every human one. They share a bed, but they inhabit different universes. In the deep stillness, imagine the king on his deathbed, years later. He reaches for the queen's hand. He looks at her with eyes that finally see the damage he has done. He wants to apologize. He wants to fix the broken oath. But it is too late. The silence has been too long. The betrayal has turned to stone. The queen looks at him, her face as calm as a winter lake, and she says nothing. The oath was broken long ago. There is nothing left to mend. Let the image of the velvet curtains and the carved oak bed fade now. The palaces have become museums, and the royal bedchambers are roped off with red cords. Tourists walk past, admiring the craftsmanship of the wood, unaware of the ghosts of the betrayals that still haunt the shadows. Your own room is a sanctuary of truth. There are no secrets hiding in your blankets. There are no broken oaths in the air you breathe. You are safe in the honesty of your own rest. Feel the softness of your pillow. It is a simple, true comfort. Let the tension in your jaw and your shoulders melt away. You don't have to keep a facade for anyone tonight. You don't have to be a symbol of a perfect union. You are just a soul, allowing the darkness to wash over you like a gentle tide. The history of the betrayal is a long, slow sigh in the dark. It is a story that has reached its final, quiet period. The secrets have all been buried. The ink has faded. The room is finally empty. Breathe in the peace. Breathe out the weight of the world. You are safe in the present. You are whole in the stillness. Sleep now, while the ancient palaces stay silent in the moonlight. Sleep, while the ghosts of the broken promises find their rest in the dust. Sleep, in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that asks for nothing but your quiet rest. The betrayals of the inner chamber have reached their final conclusion, and now, we witness the ultimate withdrawal of power. Tonight, we follow the carriage as it leaves the palace gates for the very last time. This is the story of a woman who was not executed, but was simply removed. A woman who was told to pack her life into a few wooden trunks and vanish into the mist of a distant shore. This is a queen sent away forever. Imagine a cold, gray morning in the late autumn of the 18th century. The mist is so thick that you cannot see the tops of the palace towers. A single carriage is waiting in the courtyard, its horses stamping their hooves on the damp cobblestones. There are no crowds to say
goodbye.
There are no banners. There is only the boring and repetitive sound of the wind whistling through the empty hallways. In the boring history of royal politics, exile was often more cruel than the sword. To be sent away meant to be forgotten while you were still alive. It meant watching your name being erased from the court records, your portraits being moved to the attic, and your existence being treated as a mistake that had been corrected. For the queen, the decree of exile is not a sentence, it is a slow, living death. Think of the boring task of packing a life that once filled a palace. The queen stands in her dressing room. She looks at the velvet gowns, the silk ribbons, the fans made of ivory and lace. She can only take a fraction of it. She chooses a few books. A small locket with a lock of her mother's hair. A shawl that still smells of the home she had before she became a queen. Every object she leaves behind is a piece of her identity she will never see again. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the carriage ride settle over you. Clop, clop, clop. The sound of the horses is the only music now. The queen sits inside the dark interior of the coach, watching the familiar streets of the capital disappear through the small, fogged-up window. She doesn't cry. She has no tears left for a city that has already forgotten her. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance master, imagine her arrival at her new home. It is a fortress-like manor on a rocky coast, far to the north. The walls are gray stone, stained with salt and green moss. The windows are small and face the endless, churning gray of the sea. The artist captures the way she stands on the threshold, a small, dark figure against the vast emptiness of the landscape. She is the queen of the rocks and the waves now. The tragedy of sent away forever is the absolute silence that follows. No more letters arrive from the palace. No more news of the world reaches her ears. She is in a boring bubble of time. Her days become a series of identical rituals. She walks the length of the beach, counting the steps. 100, 200, 300. She watches the tide come in, and she watches it go out. The sea is the only thing that speaks to her, and it always says the same thing. Think of the Victorian era, where this exile was often disguised as a retirement or a health retreat. The queen is sent to a remote estate in the Highlands. She is surrounded by a few loyal servants, but they are old, and they too are fading. She spends her afternoons in a cold library, reading the same history books she read as a child. She sees her own name in the later chapters, and it feels like she is reading about a stranger. The queen was retired to the country in the year of our Lord. The sentence ends there. No more details. No more story. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the psychological weight of this invisibility. She writes letters to the king, her husband, begging to see their children just once more. The letters are never answered. They are intercepted by the ministers and burned. She is a ghost haunting a house she doesn't own, in a land she doesn't belong to. The boring tragedy is the loss of her voice. She has so much to say, so many explanations to give, but there is no one to listen but the wind in the chimney. She talks to the fire. She talks to the portraits on the wall. Eventually, she stops talking altogether. Why speak when the world has already declared you silent? Imagine her years later. She is an old woman now. Her hair is as white as the sea foam on the rocks. She sits in her chair by the window, watching a ship on the horizon. She doesn't know where it is going, and it doesn't matter. She is no longer the woman who wore the diamonds. She is just a part of the landscape, as permanent and as forgotten as the stones of the manor. The betrayal is complete. The world moved on, and she was left behind in the boring stillness of her exile. One night, the candle on her bedside table flickers and goes out. There is no one there to see it. The queen has finished her long, silent journey. She is no longer sent away. She is finally, truly, free. Let the image of the grey stone manor and the cold sea fade now. The waves have washed away her footprints on the beach long ago. The manor has crumbled into ruins, its walls now home to birds and ivy. The story of the exiled queen has become a part of the wind. Your own room is warm and secure. You are not being sent away. You are exactly where you belong. There are no cold shores waiting for you, only the soft, welcoming embrace of sleep. Feel the rhythm of the stillness around you. It is a kind stillness. It doesn't hold any loneliness. It only holds the promise of rest. Let the tension in your mind dissolve like the mist on the palace towers. The history has finished its work with the queen. The decree is dust. The carriage has reached the end of the road. Breathe in the peace of the present moment. Breathe out the sorrows of the past. You are safe. You are loved. You are here. Sleep now, while the sea continues its ancient song. Sleep, while the ghosts of the old manors find their peace in the dark. Sleep, in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that asks for nothing but your quiet rest. The ink is dry. The journey is over. The story of the forgotten queen has found its final, quiet period. We have followed the queen into the cold shadows of exile, but tonight, we return to the palace to find the most intimate of betrayals. This is the story of how a person's own heart was turned against them. How the ink of a late-night confession became the evidence for a death warrant. This is love letters used as evidence. Imagine a high-vaulted stone chamber, lit only by a single, flickering lamp. On a long oak table, there is a pile of parchment. The edges are frayed, the wax seals are broken, and the ink is slightly faded in places. These are not government documents. They are not tax records or military orders. They are letters. Letters filled with whispers, with longings, and with a truth that was never meant to leave the shadows. In the boring and meticulous world of a royal trial, every word is a weapon. The lawyers and the ministers don't look at these letters as expressions of love. They look at them as exhibits. Exhibit A. Exhibit B. They read the lines about the moonlight on the garden path, and they see a meeting that shouldn't have happened. They read the words, "I am yours forever," and they see a betrayal of the king's authority. For the queen, watching her private thoughts being read aloud in a cold courtroom is a slow, rhythmic torture. Think of the boring details of how these letters were found. A bribed servant. A loose floorboard. A locked box that was forced open with a heavy iron tool. The letters had been hidden for years, kept as a comfort in the long, lonely nights of a loveless marriage. She had read them so many times that she knew the shape of every letter, the way that L curled, the way that S dipped below the line. They were the only things that made her feel alive. Now, they are the very things that will end her life. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the courtroom settle over you. The air is thick with dust and the smell of old paper. The judges sit in their heavy robes, their faces as cold and unchanging as the stone walls. One of them picks up a letter. He reads a sentence, pausing for a long time after each word. The silence of the night. The words sound different when he says them. They lose their warmth. They become clinical. They become evidence. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance master, imagine the queen as she sits in the prisoner's dock. She is dressed in black, her hands folded in her lap. The artist captures the way her eyes are fixed on the pile of parchment. Those were her treasures. Her only escape. And now, they are being used to weave a noose around her neck. The ink that once brought her hope is now a stain on her reputation that can never be washed away. The tragedy of love letters used as evidence is the violation of the soul. Think of the Victorian era, where a single letter could destroy a dynasty. The boring bureaucracy of the secret police. Men in dark suits who spend their days intercepting mail, steaming open envelopes with a slow, practiced hand. They read the secrets of a queen's heart while eating their lunch. They make notes in the margins. Possible evidence of treason. Indication of a secret meeting at the hunting lodge. The queen is unaware that her private world has become a public file. She continues to write. She continues to pour her loneliness onto the page, thinking that her words are safe in the hands of the person she trusts. But the messenger has already been bought. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the weight of the ink on those pages. Ink is such a simple thing. Just soot and oil and water. but it has the power to topple thrones. The queen lies in her cell, listening to the guards outside. She remembers the day she wrote that letter. It was a rainy afternoon in June. She remembered the way the light hit the silver inkwell. She felt so free when she wrote those words. Now, those words are bars. They are more solid than the iron on her windows. The boring tragedy is the loss of the memory. Now, when she thinks of her love, she doesn't think of the person. She thinks of the lawyer's voice. She thinks of the way the court laughed at her metaphors. The betrayal of the letters has poisoned her only happy memory. She is left with nothing but the cold, hard facts of her crime. Imagine her years later, if she survived the trial. She can no longer look at a piece of paper without feeling a shiver of fear. She has burned all her pens. She has emptied all her inkwells. She lives in a world of silence because she has learned that the written word is a trap. She has become a ghost who leaves no trace. The letters, however, remain in the archives. They are filed away in a dark drawer, forgotten for centuries. Historians find them and marvel at the prose. They call it the great tragedy of the queen. But for the woman who wrote them, they were just the screams of a lonely heart, captured in ink and held against her forever. Let the image of the cold courtroom and the pile of parchment fade now. The ink has long since turned to dust. The lawyers and the judges have been forgotten by time. The tragedy of the evidence is over. Your own secrets are safe tonight. There are no lawyers reading your dreams. There are no files being kept on your heart. Your thoughts are your own, and they belong only to the quiet of the night. Feel the softness of your blankets. They are a sanctuary where no evidence can find you. Let the tension in your mind dissolve into the darkness. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. You don't have to be careful with your words. You can just be. The history has finished with its trials. The court is adjourned. The archive is closed. Breathe in the peace of the present. Breathe out the weight of the past. You are safe. You are private. You are at rest. Sleep now, while the old letters sleep in their drawers. Sleep, while the ink of the past fades into nothingness. Sleep in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that keeps all your secrets for you. The ink is dry. The trial is over. The story of the evidence has reached its final, quiet period. We have walked through the betrayal of letters and the coldness of exile, but tonight we reach the final, echoing threshold. This is the story of the day the crown and the heart were forcibly separated by the cold edge of a blade. A moment where the state decided that a royal spouse was no longer a person, but a problem that needed to be permanently deleted from history. This is the execution of a royal spouse. Imagine a grey morning in the Tower of London, or a fog-heavy courtyard in a 16th century French chateau. The air is damp, smelling of wet straw, old stone, and the sharp, metallic scent of the frost. In the center of the courtyard stands a platform, draped in heavy black cloth that absorbs the meager light of the dawn. This is not a place for a queen, and yet, she is the only reason the world is watching this morning. In the boring and methodical world of state executions, everything is a ritual. It is a machine that moves with a slow, rhythmic, and terrifying precision. The queen has spent her last night in a small room, lit by a single candle that has burned down to a pool of translucent wax. She has not slept. You do not sleep when you are waiting for the sun to rise for the very last time. She has spent the hours counting the stones in the wall, tracing the cracks in the mortar with her eyes, up and down, over and over. The tragedy is not the death itself, but the boring wait for it to arrive. Think of the morning ritual of her final dressing. Her ladies-in-waiting are crying, their tears falling silently onto her silk kirtle. But the queen is still. She is as still as the marble statues she used to pass in the palace hallways. She chooses a dress of dark velvet, perhaps a deep crimson, the color of dried blood, so that the world will not see the stain when the moment comes. She pins her hair up, exposing her neck, a practical and haunting gesture that makes the room go cold. Every pin she places is a final act of dignity. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the final walk settle over you. Thump, 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 goes the muffled drum. The queen steps out into the cold air. She is surrounded by guards in heavy iron breastplates. Their faces are unreadable, they are just cogs in the ritual. She walks slowly, her skirts brushing against the damp straw with a soft, rhythmic sound. She doesn't look at the crowd. She looks at the sky, a pale, empty gray that holds no answers. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance master, imagine her standing on the black platform. The artist captures the contrast between the paleness of her skin and the darkness of the cloth. The light is flat, devoid of hope. She looks at the executioner, a man who is also a pawn in this game of kings. He asks for her forgiveness, a boring and traditional formality that feels like a cruel joke in the face of the axe. She gives it, her voice a thin, steady whisper in the wind. The tragedy of the execution of a royal spouse is the absolute isolation of the moment. Think of the king, her husband, who signed the warrant. He is miles away, perhaps in a hunting lodge, or in a distant palace. He is eating his breakfast. He is looking at a map. He is trying to pretend that this morning is just like any other boring morning of statecraft. But he is listening. He is waiting for the sound of a distant cannon, the signal that the deed is done, and that he is now, legally, a widower. The boring bureaucracy of death is now complete. The documents have been stamped. The witnesses have been gathered. The priest has said the final Latin prayers, the words drifting into the fog like ghosts. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the weight of that final silence. The queen kneels. She feels the coldness of the wooden block against her skin. It is a rough, honest texture, so different from the silk pillows of her youth. She closes her eyes. She doesn't think of the crown. She doesn't think of the betrayal. She thinks of a small, sunny garden from her childhood where the air smelled of honey and the only weight on her head was a wreath of daisies. The boring tragedy is that the world doesn't stop. The birds in the trees of the courtyard continue to chirp. The wind continues to rattle the shutters of the nearby houses. The sun continues to struggle through the mist. History is moving its pen, finishing a chapter, and preparing to start the next one without her. Imagine the aftermath. The platform is cleared. The black cloth is folded and put away in a chest to be used for the next victim. The crowd disperses, going back to their boring lives, talking about the weather and the price of bread. Within a week, the queen's rooms are being cleaned out. Her dresses are being gifted to others. Her name is being whispered less and less, until it becomes just a faint echo in the damp corridors of the tower. The execution was the end of her life, but the true tragedy was the boring efficiency with which she was replaced. Let the image of the gray morning and the black platform fade now. The axe is long since rusted away. The courtyard is now a place for tourists to take photos, unaware of the weight of the air they are breathing. The tragedy of the execution has been washed clean by the centuries of rain. Your own night is safe and peaceful. There are no platforms waiting for you. There are no drums beating in the dark. Your neck is safe in the softness of your pillow. Your life is your own, and it is beautiful in its quiet simplicity. Feel the rhythm of the stillness in your room. It is a gentle stillness. It doesn't ask for anything. It only offers you a sanctuary. Let the tension in your mind and your body dissolve into the darkness like the mist over the old towers. The history has finished its violent work. The ritual is over. The machine has stopped. Breathe in the peace of the present. Breathe out the sorrows of the past. You are safe. You are here. You are whole. Sleep now, while the old courtyard stays silent in the moonlight. Sleep, while the ghosts of the old queens find their final, eternal rest. Sleep in the deep, soft, rhythmic. The finality of the execution has passed, and now we enter a world where the living must carry the weight of the dead. Tonight, we walk through the darkened galleries of a palace in mourning. This is the story of a woman who didn't lose her husband to age or illness, but to the cold demands of the state. A woman who was left behind to be the eternal face of a tragedy she never wanted. This is Widowed by the Crown. Imagine a room draped entirely in black crepe. The mirrors are covered. The windows are shuttered. The only light comes from the low, blue flame of a spirit lamp. In the center of this darkness sits the queen. She is dressed in heavy, dull silk, a fabric that doesn't reflect the light, just as she no longer reflects the world around her. She is the widow of the institution. In the boring and meticulous etiquette of royal mourning, grief is not a feeling, it is a protocol. It is a series of rules that dictate the color of your stationery, the length of your veil, and the number of months you must remain in total seclusion. For the queen, being widowed by the crown means her sorrow is no longer her own. It is a public monument. It is a performance that the nation expects her to maintain long after her own heart has grown numb. Think of the boring stillness of her mourning chamber. She has spent 300 days in this room. She knows the pattern of every shadow on the ceiling. She knows the exact sound the floorboard makes when the cold night air causes the wood to contract. Creak. She spends her hours sorting through the belongings of a man she was forced to marry, and then forced to lose. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the silence of the Victorian morning settle over you. The queen picks up a pair of gloves. They still hold the shape of his hands. She traces the leather with her thumb over and over, a repetitive, hypnotic movement. She doesn't cry. Tears are for the private person, and she has been a public symbol for so long that she has forgotten how to be anything else. She is the professional mourner. Every day is a boring loop of remembrance. In the style of a dark, Victorian oil painting, imagine her walking through the palace gardens at dusk. She is a silhouette of black lace against a sky the color of a bruised plum. The artist captures the way she carries her head, tilted slightly down, as if the weight of the crown she no longer wears is still pressing on her neck. The wind rustles the dry leaves on the path. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each step is a reminder of the time she is killing, waiting for a release that only the centuries can provide. The tragedy of widowed by the crown is the freezing of a life. Think of the bureaucracy of her widowhood. The ministers come to her with papers. They talk about the legacy. They talk about the monument. They want to build a statue of her husband in the center of the city. They want her to approve the design of the pedestal. She looks at the drawings, the cold marble, the stiff poses. She realizes that the world is turning her husband into a stone god, and they are turning her into the stone priestess who must guard his memory forever. She is a prisoner of a dead man's shadow. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the weight of the mourning jewelry. Rings made of black jet. Brooches containing a lock of braided hair. These are the boring artifacts of her life. They are heavy and cold against her skin. She wears them to remind everyone that she is still his. Even though he is dust, his crown still dictates what she wears, who she sees, and where she can walk. She spends her nights in a bed that feels like a vast, empty ocean. She listens to the clock on the mantel. Tick, tick, tick. It is the only thing that moves in the room. The boring tragedy is the loss of the future. When a royal spouse is widowed by the crown, they are forbidden from starting over. They cannot love again. They cannot marry again. That would be a betrayal of the national myth. So she stays in the black silk. She stays in the shuttered room. She becomes a ghost while she is still warm. She is a bridge that leads to a grave, and she must stand on that bridge until she herself falls into the earth. Imagine her years later. The nation has moved on. There is a new king. There are new wars. But the widow remains. She is a relic of a previous era, a living fossil in the palace. People speak of her in whispers. The old queen. The tragic one. She has become a part of the boring history of the building, as unchanging as the gargoyles on the roof. The betrayal of the crown is that it gave her everything, and then demanded that she spend the rest of her life paying for it in loneliness. Let the image of the black crape and the mourning veil fade now. The spirit lamps have all gone out. The black silk has rotted away in the museum drawers. The queen who was widowed by the crown is no longer waiting in the dark. She has finally stepped out of the shadow of the tomb. Your own room is a place of light and life. You are not bound by the protocols of a dead century. You don't have to carry the weight of anyone else's legacy. Your mourning is your own, and your joy is your own. Feel the softness of your blankets. They are a sanctuary of peace. Let the tension in your heart and your mind dissolve into the darkness like the smoke from a snuffed candle. You don't have to be a monument tonight. You don't have to be a symbol of the past. You are just a soul, breathing in the quiet, honest present. The history has finished with its rituals of grief. The crape has been removed. The mirrors are uncovered. Breathe in the stillness. Breathe out the weight of the expectations. You are safe. You are free. You are at rest. Sleep now, while the old palaces dream of their former glory. Sleep, while the ghosts of the mourning queens find their final, bright awakening. Sleep in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that knows no shadows but the ones that lead to dreams. The ink is dry. The mourning is finished. The story of the widow and the crown has reached its final, quiet period. We have reached the final gate, and we find ourselves standing before the judgment of time. Tonight, we don't look at the living flesh or the breathing heart, we look at the legacy. This is the story of how two lives, intertwined in pain and power, became a single line in the archives. This is remembered as a tragic union. Imagine a quiet museum gallery in the modern world. The air is temperature controlled, perfectly still, and smells faintly of wax and ancient paper. Behind a thick pane of glass, there lies a pair of rings. Or perhaps a double portrait. People walk past, they look for a moment, and they see the beauty. They see the gold. But they don't see the centuries of silence that these objects have carried. In the boring and systematic records of history, a marriage is often reduced to a date and a political outcome. We read that the union secured the peace, or the marriage consolidated the northern territories. The history books are meticulous about the borders, but they are silent about the tears. For the kings and queens we have spoken of, their tragedy has become a public commodity. Think of the boring work of the historian. They sit in libraries, their fingers moving over dusty ledgers. They find a receipt for a wedding feast. They find a doctor's report on a queen's declining health. They piece together the tragedy not through emotions, but through artifacts. As you feel the rhythm of your own breathing, let the stillness of the archive settle over you. We are looking at the final, boring chapter of their existence. In the style of a Flemish Renaissance painting, imagine the tomb where they now lie. Their stone effigies are carved in a permanent state of peace. Their hands are folded. Their eyes are closed. They look more comfortable in death than they ever did in life. The artist who carved them centuries ago was instructed to make them look united. So they lie side by side, even if they spent their entire lives trying to get away from one another. The tragedy is now frozen in marble. As the night grows deeper in your own room, think of the irony of memory. The king who ignored his queen is now remembered only because of her tragedy. The queen who was executed is now the most famous member of her family. Their pain has become their immortality. We remember the betrayal, the exile, the golden cage, and the unanswered letters, not as human suffering, but as fascinating stories from the past. The boring passage of time has stripped away the sting of the betrayal. It has softened the edges of the executioner's axe. It has turned the lonely nights into a romantic legend. Think of the Victorian obsession with tragic romance. They loved to read about the broken hearts of the past. They wrote poems about the queens who died for love, or died for the lack of it. They created a version of history that was dramatic and dark, but they missed the boring reality of the daily exhaustion. They missed the feeling of a heavy crown at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. They missed the smell of the ink on a letter that would never be sent. The tragedy of the remembered union is that the truth is buried beneath the legend. As you drift closer to the threshold of sleep, let us reflect on the education that history provides us. When we look back at these broken crowns and shattered hearts, we aren't just looking at the past. We are looking at a mirror. These stories teach us a profound truth about the human condition. They remind us that no amount of gold, no vastness of territory, and no height of a throne can compensate for the absence of human connection. History shows us that power without empathy is a hollow vessel. We learn from these tragic unions that the most valuable thing any of us can possess is not a crown, but the freedom to be known and the ability to love without the interference of a state. The boring details of their suffering are a testament to the importance of the individual soul over the requirements of the institution. As we study their lives, we are taught to value our own simple, quiet, and free connections. The lesson of the palace is that the most beautiful gold can be the coldest prison, and the simplest wooden room, filled with love, is a greater kingdom than any empire on a map. Let the image of the museum gallery and the stone tombs fade now. The tourists have all gone home. The lights in the gallery have been turned off. The archives are locked for the night. The tragedies of the past have found their final rest, and their lessons have been tucked away in the corners of our minds. Your own night is not a tragedy. It is a peaceful conclusion to a day that was yours. You don't have to be a legend. You don't have to be a symbol. You are just you, breathing in the dark, safe in the present. Feel the softness of your blankets one last time. They are the only robes you need tonight. Let the tension of the world's history dissolve into the stillness of your room. You have traveled far through the halls of broken hearts, but now you are home. The history has finished its long, slow story. The ink is dry on the final page. The book is closed. Breathe in the quiet. Breathe out the past. You are safe. You are here. You are finally, beautifully, asleep. Sleep now, while the stone effigies keep their long watch. Sleep, while the museum halls remain silent in the moonlight. Sleep, in the deep, soft, rhythmic comfort of a night that knows no endings but the one that leads to peace. The series is complete. The ink is dry. The story of the royal love and tragedy has reached its final, eternal period.